Hi there and welcome. Jonathan here. These talks are offered freely so that no one is ever denied access to these practices. Your support makes a big difference. If you feel inspired to make a donation, please go to jonathanfoust.com. Thank you. As a bagpiper, I play many gigs. Recently, I was asked by a funeral director to play at a graveside service for a homeless man. He had no family or friends, so the service was to be at a pauper cemetery in the Kentucky backcountry. As I was not familiar with the backwoods, I got lost, and being a typical man, I didn't stop for directions. I finally arrived an hour late and saw the funeral guy had evidently gone and the hearse was nowhere in sight. There were only the diggers and a crew left, and they were eating lunch. I felt badly, and I apologized to the men for being late. I went to the side of the grave and looked down, and the vault lid was already in place. I didn't know what else to do, so I started to play. The workers put down their lunches and began to gather around. I played out my heart and soul for this man with no family and friends. I played like I've never played before for this homeless man. And as I played Amazing Grace, the workers began to weep. They wept, I wept. We all wept together. When I finished, I packed up my bagpipes and started for the car. Though my head hung low, my heart was full. As I opened the door to my car, I heard one of the workers say, "I never seen nothing like that before, and I've been putting in septic tanks for 20 years. I'm so happy you haven't heard that one. So tonight's topic is on death. Sickness, old age, and death. These are referred to as the heavenly messengers. If you're not familiar with sort of the teachings, the core teachings around the heavenly messengers, they had to do with the Buddha's awakening. When he was young, he had a very protected life. He was really not allowed to even venture out to see what was happening out there in the world. But he began to go out and look around, and he saw one day someone who was sick. And he asked his attendant, his bodyguard, "What is this?" I said, "Well, this is sickness." And he said to the guard, "Does this happen to everyone?" I said, "Yes, everyone gets sick." Another time later, he saw someone who was old, with no teeth, hunched over. And he said, "What is this?" I said, "Well, this is old age." "Does this happen to everyone? Will it happen to me?" I said, "Yes, it happens to everyone." Another time he was out with his attendant and he saw a corpse. And he asked about this. He said, "Well, what about this? Does this happen to everyone? Will this happen to me?" And his attendant said, "Yes, it happens to everyone." A fourth time, when they were out, he saw a renunciate, a sannyasin, someone who was just wearing robes with a begging bowl. And this person seemed so radiant and so happy. He went to talk to this renunciate. And the renunciate spoke of this simple life of exploring what it is, the happiness that's available, or what is there beyond sickness, old age, and death. And that became the seed for his life practice. The Buddha said that when you are visited by the heavenly messengers and you invite them in, it will transform your life. This practice is often referred to as seeing clearly. The word vipassana means to see clearly. So there are 4 parts to what I'd like to explore tonight. The first is about seeing clearly into the 3 characteristics of reality, which can deeply inform our perception of life. The second is to see clearly into the fact of the heavenly messengers. When we embrace the fact that everyone we know, in no particular order, will get sick, get old, and die. The third is seeing clearly into the possibility of cooperating with reality and what can happen when you take that on. And the fourth is seeing clearly into the possibility of living this life fully, knowing that the heavenly messengers are always present. So I like to share on these 4 things, and I have some potentially offensive jokes to roll in here as well, so stay tuned. We have our retreat coming up, our spring retreat. Just a time of really deep immersion, and particularly on retreat. But at any time when you really slow down and you really begin to pay attention to the moment-to-moment phenomena of your experience, you'll begin to see these 3 characteristics of reality. Of course, I always like to acknowledge that when the Buddha taught this, he prefaced it by saying, don't believe a word of what I'm telling you. You have to verify this through your experience. But nonetheless, they're helpful, very, very helpful insights. That when you pay attention in the moment-to-moment phenomena of what arises, you'll begin to notice that everything is changing. You begin to see into this first characteristic of anicca, of impermanence. That anything born of causes and conditions is subject to change. That includes senses, your thoughts, your beliefs, your emotions, your states of consciousness. All of that is constantly changing. The second thing you'll begin to see is how you are relating to what's happening will have direct impact on the degree of stress or suffering you'll have. If you are resisting what's here and what's changing, you're going to feel a certain degree of stress. If you can let it go, you'll feel a certain degree of freedom. So this becomes very apparent in your meditation practice. You see where you're clinging, and you see when you can let go, there's a certain degree of flow. And this is seeing clearly into the nature of dukkha, of stress, unsatisfactoriness, unsteadiness, or suffering. The third is you begin to see, when you take this place of the observer, of the witness, that none of this is personal. It's just phenomena rolling through. And you begin to see that you identify with the thoughts, that the thoughts are yours, the beliefs are yours, but your sense of self begins to become a little more porous. And you begin to see into the nature of anatta, which is described as not self. You begin to see the relative self, that who you are, that's the product of causes and conditions. All of your conditioning, how you relate to life, how you self-protect, your strategies, you see all of that. But you also begin to sense who you are that's not conditioned. A quality of presence, a quality of consciousness, whatever you might call it. These 3 qualities, these 3 aspects of reality, when we can remember them, can be so helpful. In this moment, just to sense what's changing. Sound vibrations, breath, thoughts streaming through. If you can let it be, if you can allow it, there can be a quality of freedom and spaciousness. If there's judgment, there'll be some degree of tension. And a sense that who you are is not just your conditioned self, but you are the awareness itself. It's a lot easier in my life when I can remember that. It's when I forget and I find myself in constant reaction when my suffering level increases. There's that classic phrase that says, what you resist persists. And what you can let go cultivates a sense of inner freedom. And so the practice is about remembering. It's about remembering the nature of reality. Remembering impermanence. Remembering how you relate to what's happening determines the level of suffering. And remembering that who you are is more than just your body, your thoughts, your emotions. That you are awareness itself. And the interesting thing about meditation practice, I'm often asked, in my meditation, should I be working on stuff? Are there some issues I should really be investigating? And my general response is, you don't have to look for it. It'll find you. Plenty of growth opportunities just arise quite organically if you haven't noticed. And so this leads to the second point about seeing clearly into the fact of sickness, old age, and death. There's a great yogi who once said that the greatest wonder in the world is that everyone dies. And the second greatest wonder in the world is that no one thinks they will. We fall into this trance where we assume that we're going to be here in this form forever and ever. And so when someone close to us dies, there's quite often a level of shock, a level of overwhelm. And as I've mentioned before, I've always been kind of surprised at how when someone close to me dies, I have this intense reevaluation of what's important in my life, what I want to remember, what I want to do. And then over time, that begins to fade. And I kind of fall back into the trance of someone who's on his way somewhere. So I'd like to talk a little bit about remembering that fact and how we can remind ourselves. So as I was thinking about this, I just thought about those who've been close to me in my life who've died, and started doing a little catalog of my friend Peter who drowned, my high school roommate who had cancer, another high school friend who died in a motorcycle accident, another high school friend who died of an overdose, my uncles, my aunts, my parents. It becomes a very interesting reflection. And perhaps we can just take a moment to kind of pause and reflect on this. If you like, you can close your eyes. And you might just let your attention come into the breath. And you might bring into mind those whose lives have intersected with yours, who are no longer here. And you might, in your own way, just over this next few minutes, you might just internally just say their name and reflect on who they were in your life. And you might just sense this mystery of those who have been in a form, in a body like yours, who are no longer here. Just reflecting on this poem by Mary Elizabeth Fry that's entitled, "Do Not Stand at My Grave and Weep." And do not stand at my grave and weep. I am not there. I do not sleep. I am 1,000 winds that blow. I am the diamond glints on snow. I am the sunlight on ripened grain. I am the gentle autumn rain. When you awaken in the morning's hush, I am the swift, uplifting rush of quiet birds in circled flight. I am the soft stars that shine at night. Do not stand at my grave and cry, I am not there. I did not die. And you might, in your own time, let your eyes open. It's such a mystery, this embodied life in these flesh units. And we naturally cling to life. We naturally want to hold on to what we have. One of the first times I went to a yoga class, it was a form of yoga called Mysore yoga, and it's very, very rigorous. And I believe it's from Mysore, India. But later, this is why they named it that, because afterward, man, a Mysore. But there was so much intensity in those who were practicing yoga, and I realized when I looked around the room, there was sort of this desperation to hold on to life and youth. And that's what we do. And we know we have to let go. And so when we experience grief for those we've lost, it's very important to acknowledge that and to open to that. There's a beautiful poem I ran across. I'd never heard this one before, by Rabbi Louis John Enron. And it's about what it's like when we lose someone close to us. When will I be myself again? Some Tuesday, perhaps, in the late afternoon, sitting quietly with a cup of tea and a cookie. Or Wednesday, same time or later, you will stir from a nap and see her. You will pick up the phone to call her. You will hear her voice, unexpected advice, and maybe argue. And you will not be frightened. You will not be sad. You will not be alone, not alone at all. And your tears will warm you. But not today. And not tomorrow. And not tomorrow's tomorrow. But someday. Some Tuesday, late in the afternoon, sitting quietly with a cup of tea and a cookie, and you will be yourself again. When we open to the fact of sickness and old age and death, it's heartbreaking because we cherish what we have in this life and we don't want to lose it. We don't want to lose those who we love. And the suffering is intense. The suffering of being in a body can be intense. A little while ago, this is actually about 2 years ago, a friend of my father's up in Maine, he'd been a guide in Maine, just a gnarly backwoods guy. And he was in his late 80s then. He's since passed. And He had these clear blue eyes, and I think he had a lot of stuff. He had shingles, and just very uncomfortable. And we were just kind of sitting quietly together, and he looked me in the eye, and he said in this thick Maine accent, he said, "Getting old sucks. Don't do it." So it happens. And then the question becomes, how do we embrace it? How do we remember that this life is imbued with impermanence? Again, a classic story from the Buddhist time. A young woman who lost her young child. And she went to the Buddha and said, you're this miraculous teacher. Bring my son back to life. And the Buddha demurred, but she insisted. And he said, I'll make a deal with you. Find a household where death has not come, and I will bring your child back to life. And she quite enthusiastically started off on this journey, because all she had to do was find one household where death had not come. And that became her life quest. And as you can imagine, she didn't find one. But through that deep investigation of asking people everywhere, has death come to your house? What she came away with was two things. With a deep sense of wisdom, of recognizing what's true, and an infinite sense of compassion. When we remember that everyone we know, in no particular order, will not be here, it brings us deeply to the present moment. So there's something called the 5 daily recollections. Some people find these very helpful. I have a good friend who does this every morning before he sits as a way of starting the day. And if you like, you can close your eyes, and I'll share this with you. These are called the 5 daily recollections. I am of the nature to age and decay. I have not gone beyond aging and decay. I am of the nature to become ill or injured. I have not gone beyond illness or injury. I am of the nature to die. I have not gone beyond death. All that is mine, dear and delightful, will change and vanish. I am the owner of my actions. I am born of my actions. I am related to my actions. I am supported by my actions. Any thoughts, words, or actions I do, good or harmful, those I will inherit. And if you like, you can let your eyes open. It's a pretty heavy way to start the day. I am of the nature to age and decay. I am of the nature to become ill or injured. I have not gone beyond death. Everything that is mine will vanish. I am the owner of my actions. Every thought, every speech, every action I make, I will inherit. There's something about embracing these facts that can open up all kinds of new possibilities. I have a good friend who lives in Baltimore. He recently left an executive position, and he's now a doula. And the word doula usually refers to midwife, but he has chosen to support people in their death. And I'll call him Craig, because that's his real name. He decided that he wanted to support people through the process of passing. And in particular, he wanted to support people who didn't have anyone to sit with them. And I so admire what he has chosen to do. He just gets an assignment and he goes. And some people are very quiet. Some want him there. Some are not that crazy about him being there. But he recently told me the story of being with a 92-year-old man. And this 92-year-old man loves music, loves swing music, and knows a lot about it. So Craig brings his laptop, and he'll mention a band, and then Craig will look it up on YouTube. And then they either watch or they listen to this. And recently, this 92-year-old man, he called hospice. He called the hospice center. Not to say that he's dying, but to say that in these visits, he remembers that he's still living. Isn't that awesome? And the question becomes, knowing that we're going to die, how do we want to live? Our anxiety around sickness, old age, and death is huge. So, of course, that shows up in our humor, which brings me to some potentially offensive jokes. So, a good joke on sickness. A doctor calls a patient and says, I have some bad news and I have some really bad news. The patient says, what is it? He said, the laboratory test results show that you only have 24 hours to live. The patient says, oh my God. Well, what's the worst news? The doctor says, well, the worst news is that I tried calling you yesterday, but I couldn't get through. Here's the old age joke. This guy goes to a pharmacy, and he's an older fellow. He's asking about some erectile dysfunction aids. So the guy's telling him about what's available, and he starts thinking, well, maybe this will really work. And he says to the pharmacist, well, can you get this over the counter? The pharmacist says, well, if I take 2. And finally, here's the death joke. This old man is surrounded by his best friends, and there are only a few of them left, 4 or 5 of these old guys. And he's just beginning to fade, but he says to his friends, you have been there for me my whole life. I'm so grateful. I have one last request. I have a case of aged Irish whiskey in my basement. On the anniversary of my death, would you take one of these fifths and just pour it over my grave? And his friends, his best friends, and they're crying, and he goes, oh, absolutely. And then he's tapped on the shoulder by one of the other guys, and he goes, just a second. He goes over and they huddle in the corner. And they're nodding and talking, and he comes back to his friend who's on his deathbed, and he goes, just one clarifying question. Would it be okay if we pass this through our kidneys first? So, it's so interesting how our humor comes in around sickness, old age, and death because of the deep, deep discomfort we have with it. And when you can really pause and acknowledge the fact, it can reframe your life. And so it becomes a question of, given this, how do you choose to live? You may be aware of the top regrets of the dying. This was written by someone who's sat with people for many, many years in their passing. The first one is, I wish I'd had the courage to live a true life to myself, not the life expected of me. That's the number one regret. The second, I wish I hadn't worked so hard. And this writer said, this came from every male patient that I nursed. That they missed their youth, they missed their partner's companionship. The third, I wish I'd had the courage to express my feelings. The fourth, I wish I had stayed in touch with my friends. And the fifth, I wish that I had let myself be happier. And that one is so interesting to me. And what I've noticed just in my interaction with people, it seems that most of us have a set point of how happy we're allowed to be before we start getting uncomfortable. And it's so interesting to examine the beliefs around that. And for many people, there's a sense of, if I allow myself to get any happier, the rug's going to be pulled out from underneath me. So exploring that happiness set point can be really helpful. So I'd like to offer just a short meditation to reflect on this. Kind of a two-part reflection before we close. And you might, as you close your eyes, I'd like to read these regrets of the dying and just to give you a little time to contemplate how true are these regrets for you, and what would have to shift in your life. Number one, I wish I'd had the courage to live a life true to myself and not the life others expected of me. And number two, I wish I hadn't worked so hard. Number three, I wish I'd had the courage to express my feelings. Number four, I wish I had stayed in touch with my friends. And number five, I wish that I had let myself be happier. And is there a sense of what would shift in your life if these regrets had no purchase? And a second reflection. If you had 1 year remaining before your life was over, what would you do? What would you prioritize? If you had 1 month before your life was over, what would you do? If you had 1 week, what would you do? If you had 1 day, if you had 1 hour, if you had 1 minute, if you had 1 breath, you might bring into mind those in your life who may be experiencing sickness, old age, and death right now. And you might just freely, in your own way, wish them well. Wish them freedom and peace. And gently letting your breath deepen. And when you're ready, you can let your eyes open. So as grim as this topic can be, it can also be a doorway into embracing this life we have. Embracing the mystery. I think it might be nice to end the evening with what are reportedly the final words of Steve Jobs in his passing. And I believe 3 words. Wow. 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 Thank you. While you're alive, you might enjoy a cookie and embrace it. A couple of quick announcements. This Saturday, I'm leading a day-long retreat here. It's on the power of inquiry, the questions you can ask yourself. You can sign up through IMCW, through my newsletter if you like. Remember, there's yoga here. Those who are coming to yoga, thumbs up. You enjoying it? Yeah, heard great things. So remember, that's at 6:30 to 7:20. You can sign up in the back for the mailing list. And thank you as always for your support for the church and for me and my lavish lifestyle. Have a great evening. Enjoy your cookie and enjoy life while you got it.